In southern Peru lies one of the world's most impressive archaeological feats, Machu Picchu. Even after 6 centuries, these vast Inca ruins remain almost entirely intact, attracting over 1 million visitors each year. In 1911, American explorer Hiram Bingham headed into this inhospitable jungle in search of archaeological ruins. On July 24th, just a few days after leaving Cusco, a local showed him an unexpected treasure. The ruins of a vast city, almost completely unknown to Westerners, perched high up at 2,430 meters altitude. Machu Picchu.
Bingham was amazed by the constructions at Machu Picchu and its location near Cusco. He was also struck that no text had ever mentioned the city at this site.
The city was built by the Incas, who created the greatest pre-Columbian American empire in the 15th century. At its height, the Incan Empire ruled nearly 10 million people, who helped construct its greatest monument, Machu Picchu. The empire collapsed after the arrival of the Spanish conquistadors between 1532 and 1572. However, unlike most other Incan ruins, Machu Picchu remains almost entirely intact.
The conquistadors never made it here, or they'd certainly have raided it for treasure and gold. Because they didn't, Machu Picchu is still standing.
The city, known as Yucta in Quechua, the main language of the Incas, is believed to have been built during the reign of Pachacuti, the first Incan emperor. Nearly 200 of its structures still stand today, including houses, ceremonial altars, and remarkable religious monuments, such as the Temple of the Condor, the Temple of the Three Windows, and the Temple of the Sun. The city was built on a steep ridge between 2 peaks, Machu Picchu to the south and Huayna Picchu to the north. The whole area covers more than 32,500 hectares, divided by archaeologists into 2 main areas, the urban and the agricultural sectors. The agricultural sector consists of a network of terraces that sculpt the mountainside. Only a few buildings overlook the valley here, among them the Guardian's House, which once watched over the city, its surroundings, and the nearby storehouses. In the urban sector, the buildings were built using a typical Incan architectural style and layout, with an upper district, Hanan, and a lower district, Hurin.
In many Incan cities, the Hanan or upper district is where you find the most spectacular monuments. The Hurin district was much more working class, let's say. It reveals a certain view of the world. The Andean world was based on the idea of duality, a marriage of opposites to bring harmony.
The Hanan and Hurin districts are separated by another key feature of Incan cities, a main square, 90 meters long and 25 meters wide.
People would generally gather in these squares for ceremonies. It might be dancing, a festival, or military procession.
Machu Picchu's Yucta is thought to have been abandoned during the Spanish conquest. When Hiram Bingham arrived, only a few farmers and their families were living there. Despite remaining empty for several centuries, the dense vegetation and sometimes unforgiving climate, these structures have remained standing throughout the centuries in this exceptional location. But building them to begin with was a huge challenge. The jagged mountainsides and brutal precipices were a danger to workers. The climate only made things more difficult. As much as 2,000 millimeters per square meter of rain could fall in a year, nearly twice the annual average rainfall in the UK, and most of it would be concentrated in one half of the year.
The Incas were pretty aware of the power of the water, and every rainy season there are landslides in the Andes.
But these environmental threats were clearly not enough to dissuade the Incan builders.
The most impressive part of the building of Machu Picchu is the fact it was built on a mountain with vertical cliffs in an area that's extremely hilly. These were incredibly skilled builders who rose to the challenges of their natural surroundings.
But why did the Incas choose this location to build their eternal city? Located 47 miles from Cusco as the crow flies, the ancient Incan capital of Machu Picchu is situated in the Vilcabamba region, a part of the Andes mountain range that is also on the edge of the Amazonian rainforest. These two ecosystems provided essentials to Incan life.
Some very important products come from this upper jungle area. I think the most important ones are coca, medicinal plants, and exotic bird feathers. Further down, there are other resources such as gold and silver.
And from the Andes come other essential produce: corn, quinoa, llama meat, and over 3,000 varieties of potatoes still cultivated today. The location is strategic. A city at 2,400 meters between towering mountains and an inhospitable jungle might seem isolated, but that would overlook another defining feature of the Inca Empire. To transport goods and manpower for the city's construction, several roads led from Machu Picchu, linking it to around 60 nearby settlements. These routes formed part of the Capacnan, or Main Andean Road, a vast pre-Columbian network stretching nearly 30,000 kilometers, connecting the four corners of the Inca Empire. Crossing forests, mountains, valleys, and deserts, it was a feat of both beauty and engineering that helped maintain Incan order and power.
The person who designed it was a genius, and we assume it was Pachacuti.
Strategically linked with the rest of the empire via this road, the location also has other advantages. Perched high up on a mountain ridge, it's at the center of some incredible natural surroundings.
I think that the decisive element was the magic of the location. There are very few places which showcase such amazing views, right? These huge granite mountains, the Urubamba Canyon that snakes its way through the depths of the valley, the Amazon on the faraway horizon. They all combine to make this place one of a kind.
The river curving around the city's base and the towering mountain peaks encircling it made this site sacred to the Incas.
In the Andean world, and especially in Incan culture, they thought of the landscape as living, even human. The mountains were reminders of their ancestors, their protectors, and they revered these natural geographical features.
The power of the sovereign had to be represented in different ways, and that was also one of Machu Picchu's functions, to impress its subjects with these kinds of constructions, which demonstrated in no uncertain terms just what the Incas were capable of.
But these many advantages did not cancel out dangers. The Incas were talented builders, and to overcome the challenges presented by the location, they began the monumental task of preparing the land for construction. Once the vegetation was cleared, the Incas began sculpting the mountainside, transforming its steep slopes for construction and cultivation. Starting from the base, they built terraces step by step, gradually taming the rugged landscape into habitable and fertile ground. They sculpted the craggy mountainsides into more than 10 hectares of flat, workable land for both farming and construction. But it didn't end there. From the very beginning of construction, they had already anticipated the greatest threat to their city: water.
The rain can be very dangerous. When it rains, the water soaks into the ground, gradually taking with it more and more soil. After a certain amount of time, that can lead to landslides. So it was a big challenge.
When there is a heavy rain, the water needs to be evacuated, otherwise Machu Picchu could collapse. That's why the Incas constructed the drainage water system underground, the terraces, to evacuate all the water that was coming with the rainy season.
Thanks to various studies, researchers have discovered the interior composition of the terraces in the agricultural sector. As they cut the blocks of stone to build walls at the rocky base of the mountain, the Incas used any wasted construction material to fill the inside of the terraces according to a very precise system. The first layer was made up of stones covered in large waste fragments, and above that was a layer of gravel and sand. This was all covered in a final layer of fertilized soil.
When the rain comes, it soaks into the soil, passes through the sandy gravel layer, then the rocks, until it reaches the ground. From there, it descends to the bottom of the valley. At Machu Picchu, you don't notice if it's been raining heavily because all the water gets soaked up.
Without terraces, the Machu Picchu wouldn't exist because it helps to hold it still in the place. Otherwise, it would just flow with the landslide.
In the agricultural sector, these terraces made up almost 5 hectares of farmland. These were used to grow crops, but their surface area was not large enough to cater for the whole population of Machu Picchu, who also relied on regional products being imported. Today, archaeologists believe the terraces may actually have been used as an agricultural test lab.
Pollen analysis reveals that the Incas at Machu Picchu cultivated not only coca, but also quinoa, corn, and other crops. This suggests they adapted plants from the valley floor to grow at higher altitudes and experimented with highland species in lower zones, testing how different crops could thrive across elevations.
The Incas may therefore have tried to adapt jungle plants to higher altitudes, as well as Andean plants to the Amazonian climate to grow certain crops in new environments. Some experts of Incan architecture believe the terraces had more than just an agricultural function.
Often the terraces serve to sculpt and form the landscape. And therefore, to say that these spaces had a purely agricultural function is to ignore a large part of their significance.
Whether they served an agricultural or landscaping purpose at the time of the Incas, these terraces now feed Machu Picchu's only remaining year-round inhabitants. The terraces in the urban sector are also filled with stones and construction rubble, and were used as foundations for different edifices in the city of the Incas. Ultimately, researchers believe that more than half of the human effort needed to build Machu Picchu went into building these foundations and this underground drainage system. It was a colossal project in terms of both execution and planning.
At the time, they didn't have paper or anything else to draw or paint on, right? The builders worked through the whole process in their heads. That's where the genius of Machu Picchu's construction truly lies.
And their talents didn't stop at building terraces. In order to then build and assemble the walls of the buildings they support, the Incas had to extract, cut, and transport granite blocks, some of which were enormous, and they managed this without wheels, without iron, and without steel. In Yucta's center, One place still gives us an idea of the chaos of stones and rubble that the whole site must have resembled before it was completed: the quarry. It shows Machu Picchu's primary raw material, huge blocks of granite.
To build these buildings, they used the hardest, most resistant stones, which would stand the test of time. As an architect, you want your structure to be long-lasting.
We're talking about more than 400 years, almost 500 years, when some contemporary constructions don't last more than 50 years. It was built to last, for the children of our children's children. It's this idea of eternity. Stone is eternal.
North of the central square is a half-built abandoned platform. It features a ramp which was used to transport the blocks from their place of extraction upwards, towards the top of the walls that were being built further down. Certain texts, Quechuan traditions, and the study of different quarries used by the Incas show techniques they might have used. Some blocks could have easily been pulled using ropes and human strength, sliding them along a bed of sand or clay. But depending on the size of the block, the terrain, and the equipment available, the Incas also used a system resembling a wooden ladder, on which they pushed the blocks forward with levers. Or they would roll the blocks forward on stone cylinders, pulling them with rope.
Here is one of the cylinders used to move the stones.
Once the stones had been transported to the top of the wall, the laborer's job was far from over. For it's in the assembly and the finishing touches that the Incas' true genius is revealed. Once the stone was in place, the Incas continued to hone its shape, sometimes until it fitted perfectly into the rest of the wall.
This block at the top has a mark here, where they were supposed to hit it, to create a flat surface for the block below it, which already had a relatively smooth surface. Once the two surfaces matched, they would lift the block a little, remove the stone wedge, and the block could be placed perfectly on top of the ones below it.
This method was meticulous, but also approximate. For perfection, the Incas also used the trial and error technique. A fine layer of sand would be spread over the top of the block underneath before the wedge was removed. If the two blocks didn't fit together, the wedge would be put back. Based on the imprints left in the sand, certain parts of the stone would be reworked until the blocks fitted perfectly together. In the sacred square, the Temple of the Three Windows is an example of one of the most meticulously constructed buildings in Machu Picchu.
Cutting and hammering were quite easy tasks. What's most extraordinary is this, the way the blocks were assembled. It's an incredible technique.
The gap between the blocks shows us that even here inside the wall, they were carefully worked to fit together perfectly. And what's more, their surface isn't straight, but curved. Very precise and difficult work for something that would normally be invisible.
I think it's comparable to Michelangelo's work in stone. This is the most difficult task achieved by the Incan stonecutters.
Once the blocks were fitted together, the Incas finished by working the wall's exterior surface, by either smoothing the stone or giving it a convex shape. But not every wall was cut with the same amount of care, or in the same style. The granite blocks could have different shapes, different sizes, and be fitted together in various styles. The most basic walls were built with mortar, whereas the ones which required the greatest precision only have a thin layer of sand between the blocks, which is invisible from the outside. The most remarkable walls are known as ashlar walls, made up of perfectly aligned, regular-shaped blocks. Encyclopean walls, made up of huge blocks that fit together perfectly.
To make a terrace, they didn't need to build a particularly elaborate wall, so they built a simple, basic wall. But if you want to build a temple like this one on my left, you need an ashlar wall, don't you? So it depends on the type of structure.
Whether visible or hidden beneath the terraces, the city's walls are supported by the mountain itself. And that's the secret to their longevity.
The structures are very resistant to earthquakes because they're very well built. They're fused with the rock, and that's the best type of foundation.
Stroke after stroke, wall after wall, the Incas built nearly 200 buildings in this way. From one-room buildings called canchas to the grandest temples. Adding doors, windows, and trapeze-shaped alcoves typical of Incan architecture. Researchers have even tried to calculate how long it took to build certain walls. Like the one in the mortar or water mirror room. They studied the most precisely constructed section of the wall at its base. Based on exact measurements, archaeological experiments, and knowledge of Inca construction methods, researchers proposed a hypothesis. Building the lower section likely required 18 skilled workers over about 82 days.
If you assume the calculations we've made are correct, the planning, stabilization, the foundation work, and building the wall, all that would have taken around 8 years, at least in the first phase of building Machu Picchu.
These very carefully erected walls have enabled the construction of 172 buildings within Machu Picchu, serving both administrative and religious purposes. And some of these buildings have a very particular orientation and seem to be very closely connected to their sacred natural surroundings.
In Andean civilization, astronomy played a fundamental role because it meant they could identify the movement of the stars, establish dates in their calendar, equinoxes, and especially solstices, because these indicated significant seasonal changes for agriculture. And a calendar of rituals was also established, which was linked to astronomy.
They could estimate when it was time to sow their crops, to harvest, to work the soil and fertilize it.
One of Machu Picchu's most symbolic monuments, the Intihuatana, seems to have been designed based on the position of the sun. Located on top of a pyramid-shaped platform at an altitude of 2,468 meters, at the highest point of the urban sector, this ceremonial altar is made of a remarkably shaped block. From this point, the surrounding sacred mountains are aligned with the 4 cardinal directions, with the sun rising precisely over the highest summit during certain solstices and equinoxes. In Quechua, Intihuatana means hitching post of the sun, and many hypotheses have been proffered based on the observations people have made regarding how light and shadow fall on this sculpture.
At the summer or winter solstice, the shadow falls in this direction until it reaches this corner. So a shadow is cast all the way over here.
The shadow moves to the center of the door frame of the structure opposite for the March and September equinoxes. And during the winter solstice, by positioning themselves on these steps, an observer becomes perfectly aligned with the Intihuatana and the sun. Like the Intihuatana, other symbolic monuments at Machu Picchu were built in relation to the sun's position in the sky at these important moments of the year. Was their construction precise enough for them to build real observatories? a team of Polish researchers collaborated with teams in Peru and Italy to test a scientific reconstruction of Machu Picchu and a map of the sky during the Incan Empire. In particular, they studied the Temple of the Sun. Next to the Inca city, atop a rock face, stands a tower with a semicircular wall.
The Temple of the Sun is, without a doubt, the most important temple in the whole of Machu Picchu. Architecturally speaking, it's highly skilled work.
Inside the tower, this iconic wall has been decorated with 9 alcoves, 2 windows, and a sort of door. At the center of the room, a cut rock looks like it might have been a ceremonial altar. Several hypotheses have been put forward as to its connection with the sun. It's said that there is one point from which it's possible to observe the sun rising in the first window during the June solstice, and also the second window during the December solstice. During the June solstice, the rising sun also creates a rectangle of sunlight on the altar. Some people even wonder whether it was used as a sundial to count down the time left before this important event. However, the team of Polish researchers looked into how exact the Incas could have been in their observations. They calculated that if the observation point for the 2 solstices really exists, it must be situated 40 centimeters from the ground and 20 centimeters from a wall.
You'd have needed to lie down with your head on the ground in order to see it, because that's the only place it would work. So in theory it's possible, but in practice, no, not really.
There's no doubt the sun did illuminate the altar, but not to the level of precision required to calculate the exact date of the solstices.
We were able to show that the phenomenon of the stone being illuminated by the sun is real, but the direction is very general. So it could be used for rituals, but not actual astronomy.
Apart from a cave built with enough precision to observe the cycles of the sun and the moon, Machu Picchu also features several monuments aligned with the position of the sun. These structures were likely used for rituals that marked and celebrated important moments in the Inca calendar.
The level of knowledge and experience necessary to build this type of architecture is very high. The Incas were the result of thousands of years of cultural and social development in the Andes.
We don't know exactly who these skilled builders were. The Incas were able to design and construct Machu Picchu thanks to the vast workforce they controlled, drawn from the peoples they had conquered. Under the mita system, subjects were required to provide 1 or 2 months of labor each year to the state, a form of organized and often forced labor that sustained the empire's great architectural achievements.
It was a service, a tax which gave the state temporary access to citizens' workforce. It might be people with a particular technical skill, but it could also just be people who could lend brute force to a project. The empire would send for whole communities to carry out certain tasks.
Their stone ruins have remained standing and almost completely intact for nearly 600 years. But centuries of bad weather have got the better of other buildings. In an area that's part of the lower city of Machu Picchu, some walls still betray traces of color. These are the remains of colored renders applied by the Incas.
Once the stone walls were completed, they were coated with clay, red or yellow in color, and sourced locally.
Archaeological digs show that the clay was nearly 20 centimeters thick and that you couldn't see the joins between the stones. The walls were smooth and completely covered the stone.
We don't know how many walls were rendered outside of this area, but this final touch would have insulated the buildings from the cold. From the very start of the construction phase, the Incas included 129 drains within the walls of their city. This diverted rainfall towards the lower section of the city, or even towards the main drainage canal, a natural geological fault which they used to drain water into the bottom of the valley. With this infrastructure, researchers estimate that the urban sector could drain 13,000 liters of water per hectare per year.
It's a lot of water, and it had to be evacuated somehow because otherwise Machu Picchu could be flooded.
Whether underground or open air, Machu Picchu's ingenious water evacuation system gave the city durability. But the Incas didn't evacuate all the water. They also needed it for daily and religious life. For this, they identified two natural sources on the north slope of the mountain of Machu Picchu. They then built a 749-meter-long canal to transport water through the forest, thanks to a gradient of between 2 and 5%, despite the naturally steep slopes.
They didn't have any models. They were observing how the water flows, and they knew how fast it should be flowing through the channel.
As the canal passes through the agricultural sector, its gradient lessens, and excess water overflows onto the terraces. It then flows over an aqueduct above the evacuation canal into the city, reaching the first fountain beside the royal household with the purest water. A stone channel guides the water to the fountain's top, where a rectangular spout directs a measured jet into a stone basin.
It's a masterpiece of Incan engineering in terms of how precisely it controls the water.
After the first fountain, the water continues its journey through the canal underground to the next few fountains whose stonework and proximity to the Temple of the Sun both suggest that they were for ceremonial use. It then continues its route along the stairway of the fountains, which seem to have been for domestic use. Finally, the water reaches the 16th and final fountain, which had no public access and was connected to the Temple of the Condor, the sacred bird of the Andes. After this last fountain, any water that hadn't been used trickled into the main evacuation canal, draining out into the forest below. These fountains worked all year round. Between the dry season and the rainy season, they could deliver between 25 and 125 liters of water per minute. But they were built to manage up to 300 liters.
It had to be less than 10 liters per minute to stop, but in general, we can see it through both seasons that it flows constantly.
But the system was not infallible, and the Incas knew this. Archaeologists have found sections of the canal network that were never finished. Some seem to be part of a new tributary canal, while the points of others seem to have been to limit overflow into the ground at certain points.
The Incas were going to replace a part of the canal which was made of smaller stones and mud mortar with big stones, which would stop so much rainwater being wasted.
To collect this precious water, the Incas used ceramic pots of different sizes, which they would place directly under the water jets and then carry on their backs. To ensure the site was well drained and that their daily water needs were met, the Incas created a comprehensive network which allowed them to control both its arrival and departure on Machu Picchu.
They were genius engineers and they knew how to bring the water and control it constantly. The life in the Andes depends on it, of course. The one who controls the water controls the power.
But how long exactly has Machu Picchu been standing on these steep slopes? For many years, the Inca city was thought to have been built sometime after 1450. But today's scientific knowledge could suggest otherwise. Historians first turned to archives left by this civilization, but they didn't have a real writing system. To govern their empire, they did, however, have other ways of keeping information. For example, quipus, knots in ropes as a way of recording numbers.
We know that the experts who used quipus were also able to record names, places, and events on them.
But today, we no longer know what these numbers signified.
For example, here we count 2,345, but what does that refer to? To the number of inhabitants in a town? To the number of loads of corn transported to the royal household? We just don't know.
Historians therefore turn to texts written by the Inca successors. Texts dating back to the collapse of the empire, based on the stories of survivors or their descendants. In the 20th century, American anthropologist John Howland Rowe used these texts and other administrative documents to create a timeline for the rise of the Incan Empire. According to him, it all started in 1438. The Incas were just a small tribe living in the Cusco region when their emperor, Pachacuti, launched the expansion of his empire. His successors continued to conquer land and peoples, and in less than a century they had built the biggest empire in pre-Columbian America. Pachacuti is famous as the first Incan conqueror, but also for his skills as a builder. Under his reign, the construction of the greatest monuments of his civilization began, including Machu Picchu.
People knew that the land on which Machu Picchu stood was the private property of Pachacuti Inca Yupanqui, which his family subsequently inherited. So, if you look at the dates suggested by Rowe, it was estimated that the construction of Machu Picchu began after 1450 to 1460. But the problem is that in the Andes, there are no pre-Hispanic documents. So this timeline is based on quite weak evidence.
The investigation took a new direction in 2020 when Polish researchers, working with teams from Peru and New Zealand, re-examined these dates. They based their research on carbon dating. Dominika Ściskowska and her colleagues are studying samples from archaeological digs at Machu Picchu.
I'm looking at a piece of rope that the Incas made, possible for the construction of buildings or for a daily use. Our Peruvian colleagues excavated them at the site and are related to the first occupation moment. That means that they are coming from the moment of construction of floors, etc. We have some ropes, pieces of textiles, and corn, the basic Inca food.
These samples are from both animal and plant-made materials. All living things are made up of carbon-14, a chemical element that's very useful in archaeology because it can be used to find out when an organic organism died, before it was used by the Incas. To do this, the sample must be carefully cleaned of any impurities which might affect the results of the study. Next, the sample is put in an oven, reducing it to just a few specks of dust, the purest form of carbon possible. Then it's put into a machine that can identify the quantity of chemical elements it contains.
What we would count is how much of the isotope of C14 left in the sample, and that's how we know where the organism died.
The 50 or so samples that have already been tested reveal that the Incas were present in the Machu Picchu region earlier than originally thought, and that they may have started building around 1420 at the latest, so several decades before originally estimated, calling into question the Inca timeline as we know it.
It means that Pachacuti started the conquest before, and that the Inca Empire lasted for more than 100 years.
The team continues to analyze samples to attain more precise results, and we now know that Machu Picchu was built at least 600 years ago. An incredible feat for these skilled builders who we believe had no writing system. The Incas threw themselves into the challenge of using their natural surroundings: water, stone, wood, and even the position of celestial bodies to design buildings which continue to amaze archaeologists and tourists around the world.
Machu Picchu is unique in marrying an incredible landscape with architecture which rises to the challenge of building something equally extraordinary.
Even though they started to build the city from nothing, they accomplished it, and the buildings are standing still for 500 years.
There are so many different wall designs, and they are of exceptional quality. There is nothing else like this in the world. There is only one Machu Picchu.